All right. Thank you everyone for joining. Really excited to have you all here today. So today we'll be talking a bit about SOX spreadsheets and how to manage those SOX spreadsheets and the type of controls that you want to have in place as an organization, as a public company. So before we get started, just want to do some quick introductions. My name is Chris Trammell. I'm with Apparity. We are based in Atlanta, Georgia. We have offices in New York and London. We're a spreadsheet management software company. We have over a decade of experience providing solutions to all public companies across all industries. And while we have solutions that manage a number of different applications, really spreadsheets are our bread and butter. So I work in our professional services team, managing clients across primarily financial services, while also leading proof of concepts across all of our clients. So have a really good understanding of the types of things that our clients look for nowadays when it comes to their spreadsheets, when it comes from our SOX compliance. So excited to give you all that information today, and looking forward to talking with everyone. So as we go through this, I believe I should be able to see everyone, any questions you guys have in the chat. So feel free to send a quick chat message through if you have any questions. So really, I'll be presenting things for probably about 45 minutes today. We'll try to leave the group discussion or one-on-one to talk through any different policy initiatives that everyone has going on, best practices, or to talk a little bit about the solution. But really, the goal of today is to give everyone here the basics on SOX spreadsheets. So we'll start off with what SOX spreadsheets are, why they're important to you as a public company. We'll walk through the risk that your spreadsheets bring to your business. And then, very importantly, we'll talk about how you can manage that risk and evidence that to regulators. We'll talk through the type of things that regulators look for when assessing a program, a SOX compliance program, specifically as they relate to spreadsheets. And then finally, for the second half today, we'll talk through how a solution like Apparity can facilitate that strong controls environment through a quick demo. So starting off with a little bit about Sarbanes and the policy itself. So when we talk about Sarbanes, specifically as it relates to spreadsheets, what we're really talking about is Section 404. And so within this section, really what Sarbanes is asking or requiring companies to do is for management of public companies to assess the effectiveness of their internal controls over their financial reporting. So this applies to all companies, regardless of industry, and really is a C-suite and board level priority. So what that means is ensuring that all aspects of the financial reporting process, not necessarily just spreadsheets, maintain the proper level of controls, and that management can effectively say that, yes, these numbers are accurate and they reflect actual experiences. Now, it's not just enough for management to be able to assess that effectiveness. Really, this is also a major priority for regulators as well, as they're kind of on the hook for this as well. So Section 404B also requires the auditors of public companies to attest and report on this management assessment. So this applies to almost all public companies. So public companies under $75 million in revenue are not necessarily required to follow Section 404B. But it is a high priority. And so, when we started when I started with Apparity about 2.5–3 years ago, what we really found is that financial services was the heavy driver of spreadsheet management. And so how this has changed a bit is really as regulators are coming into this world and finding that there's a major gap within spreadsheet management and the risk they bring to the business around the controls that they bring. We're finding that public companies across all industries must become more aware. Now, what Sarbanes is actually asking companies to do is to assess and attest to they're controlling their spreadsheets effectively, and that the risk they bring to the business is being controlled. So while this applies to spreadsheets that directly impact the financial reporting. This is also for spreadsheets that indirectly affect financial reporting. So things that just maybe validate results that come from another system, or test spreadsheets that are used to help validate results. So the overall goal of this is then to provide investors confidence in the numbers that are being reported. Now, it's not just enough to get the numbers right. So even if our numbers are correct, companies can still be non-compliant. It's kind of a dual aspect to the controls that people need to apply. So even if numbers are correct, if the framework and the policy that sits around your spreadsheets isn't effective or isn't there, that can still lead to regulators leading you to declare a material weakness. So we'll dive into all this a bit more, but just as a high level, this is really where Sarbanes and spreadsheets interact with one another. So while Sarbanes does apply to all aspects of financial reporting, we find that spreadsheets are heavy drivers of risk within the process. So 98% of companies consider spreadsheets as an integral or critical part of their financial reporting process. So it may seem like a very large number, but when we think back to all the different touch points that spreadsheets can have, it really does make a lot of sense. So while certain companies are directly aggregating information in their spreadsheets, others are using spreadsheets that I mentioned earlier to validate that information from another system. So this is actually one of the reasons that Apparity was founded, is our founder, one of our co-founders, used to work implementing large enterprise systems. And so what we found is that companies would spend millions of dollars, hundreds of man hours of time getting these ERP systems implemented, and then they'd find that the controls were completely ineffective because people would still take that data, pull them out, put them in Excel, do all the heavy lifting from Excel, and then place them back into the ERP system. So really, what spreadsheets are often used to do is that heavy analysis piece. And what we're finding is that companies need to make sure that they have controls around that process. The second interesting stat I want to bring up is that 88% of all spreadsheets contain formula or data lineage errors. So we have spreadsheets which are used for highly critical reporting processes, really throughout that process. And then we find that they are very error prone within that process. I'm sure this will really come to no surprise as many of you on the call today. That spreadsheets do contain errors, but it's fun, or I think interesting, to look at some of the different ways in which this has impacted companies. And there's some pretty high profile examples of how this can be very costly and damaging to companies. So here on the screen, we'll see 3 different examples. And we don't want to dive too much into each of these, but just to give ourselves a high level overview of the types of things that spreadsheet errors and really minuscule small spreadsheet errors, the big impact they can cause on the business. So JP Morgan Chase, many of you may be familiar with an event called the London Whale, where a spreadsheet error within a VAR spreadsheet contributed to an over $6 billion loss that they had to take. A company called Conviviality, actually in the United Kingdom, had an arithmetic error where they had a plus in the spreadsheet. It should have been a minus. They exaggerated profits accidentally by over $5 million and had to restate their earnings. This led to them having to, their stock price being devalued, losing over 60% of its value, and ended up having to get bought out by another company. Marks and Spencer, double counting in the spreadsheet led them to reissue a correction. So they had to misreport their group sales figures, reissue a new statement. Now, there are countless examples, and you can go on Google spreadsheet horror stories and find the number of different examples across all industries. These are just 3 that we chose here today. What I think is really interesting here is that all 3 of these are not necessarily indicative of having a policy in place or an effective spreadsheet management policy, but being able to execute upon it. So they also all have in common where very small errors within spreadsheets had very big repercussions. Now, on the left side of the screen here, you'll see some of the different spreadsheet errors that we just talked about a little bit. What I think is also equally as interesting is the stat on the very top, that 39 spreadsheet material weaknesses have been filed in 2019 alone. So while a material weakness on your financial reporting can be caused by spreadsheet errors, it also can equally likely be caused by process deficiencies. So not having a process, a well-defined process and policy for your spreadsheets can lead to a material weakness. I mentioned earlier how just having your accurate numbers isn't enough. So some areas in which we typically see a policy or a material weakness being due to a process deficiency is first, a lack of a defined spreadsheet management policy. So just not having anything in place at all. The second we look at is a failure to effectively apply controls within the policy. So while a policy in theory is obviously a great first start, being able to effectively apply that policy is really the only way to avoid deficiencies within this area. And finally, being able to demonstrate and making sure that your program grows year over year and shows that continuous improvement really is critical to ensuring that your process remains up to date and compliant. Oftentimes, we'll get called in by customers who will, have a spreadsheet management policy in place. They've attempted to kind of do things manually for a long time, or they've kind of kept it static over a number of years. And they've been hit with a regulatory issue because they haven't kept that policy up to date. And the spreadsheets, like all things within most companies, are constantly evolving, and there's constantly different aspects of their policy that need to be updated. So making sure that you're constantly updating your policy and that you have the technology that can reflect that is really critical. So we spend a lot of time talking about the risk that spreadsheets bring to your environment. That actually all kind of makes us think, why are we even still using spreadsheets than to begin with? So despite the risk that we have with spreadsheets, despite the risk that they bring to our business, spreadsheets bring a lot of value. And there's a lot of good reason for keeping them around within our processes. So the top two here, I think, are perhaps the most important. Is first of all, they're low cost and highly flexible. I'm sure everyone on the call today can open up their laptop or their desktop and look down and see the Excel logo on the bottom. Excel is a pervasive part of every organization, so it's very low cost and it's highly flexible. So I don't know if there's another application out within the world that has quite as many use cases as Excel has. So purpose or a handful of purposes, Excel really can be utilized to satisfy a number of different use cases. Finally, many of us have grown up learning how to use Excel, whether it be in school, early in business. Excel is very easy to use. It's pervasive throughout our lives, in our environment, we use it in our personal lives, and we use it within business. And finally, one of the most interesting things about Excel is how interconnected it can be, both within other Excel applications, but also to other applications that are not within the Microsoft Office suite even. So Excel has a lot of tie-ins to external databases and third-party applications that make it very powerful for bringing data in from other systems, using it as a very powerful analytical tool, manipulating that data and then passing it on and processing it. Now, the key with all of this then is to make sure that you're managing your spreadsheet risks in a safe way so that you can keep all these benefits. Without the risk, Excel remains a very powerful tool to you and your end users, and also a very low-cost tool. We need to make sure that we're combining that effective risk management to ensure that we're still getting the same benefit from our spreadsheets. Now, how we do this is first by defining an effective spreadsheet policy. And there are really three main components to this. The first being the identification of all your critical spreadsheets that make up or feed into your financial reporting processes. So governance teams need to evidence that they've located all spreadsheets of their environment that support any of your financial reporting processes. Now, this applies to any of your spreadsheets that may directly feed, they could support or validate your financial reporting processes. All those really are in scope. And then you must evidence that you've gone through the proper procedures. Oftentimes when we're brought into a client, they'll say, I don't know what I don't know. Or they'll have been asked the question by their regulator, are you really sure that you found everything that feeds this process? And the answer is a really hard one to have confidence that you can say yes in. Because identification of spreadsheets, when there's thousands, if not millions of them possibly floating around in your environment, can be very, very challenging. But it's really not enough, and the answer of I'm not sure or I think so isn't good enough to make sure that you can say that back to a regulator. Now, while identification is nice and it's a great step, you still see that we have it listed in red there. As we grow this program and we build out our policy more and more, the next core component is being able to maintain an effective inventory of all your spreadsheets. Now, you'll see and you'll hear me say time and time again, evidencing. So build, maintain, and evidencing that you have an inventory built is critical. And the reason we say evidencing very often is that it's not enough to do these steps. You have to be able to prove that you've done them. So as this relates to your inventory, we need to make sure that you have a simple listing of all critical spreadsheets, but also that you understand the data associated with each of them. So what that means is being able to understand certain user roles, like who owns the spreadsheet, who's an approver for it, who's helping develop that spreadsheet, what supported business process. So it can't just be that this supports your financial reporting process. It needs to be the specific processes that this supports, because your regulators are going to want to make sure that you understand the detailed information of what this spreadsheet is doing, what processes it supports. And finally, you need to build a risk profile for each of these. So what type of risk do these bring to the business? Now, it's important also that the risk profile that you build is standardized and based on your policy. So your policy and procedures must be clear in how you're defining the risk that a spreadsheet will bring. And users need to use this policy as they're helping you build out your inventory so you can build this overall risk profile. Because what this risk profile should be used for is helping to define the controls that need to be placed against each file, as well as who's going to own that control within your business. So we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about the different types of controls that you need to apply. But it's very important that you're able to evidence those controls and show them why we're applying them to each of our different spreadsheets. Now, typically within an organization, we'll see that higher risk means more controls, lower risk means less controls, but that can vary by company, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go through this on what each of those controls look like. Finally, that annual inventory, or that inventory that you build, needs to be attested to annually. So all it means is maintaining that inventory and not just making it a one-time process. It needs to be part of people's annual or quarterly processes. So your regulators are going to come back every year, every quarter, and say, are you sure you still know? Are you sure that you found everything? So as with anything, Excel spreadsheets are really no different in that they are created every single day. They're deleted every single day. So being able to maintain that inventory and having your users attest that a spreadsheet is still in use is another critical part of this process. Finally, we've talked about it a bit to this point, but being able to apply controls and managing that spreadsheet risk. You'll see here how we kind of move from red to green over the course of our policy. And while the first two are critical, really great first steps that we recommend that every customer take, until you get to that controls aspect, your risk and the risk that these bring, it really isn't being managed effectively. This is twofold. So the first part of your controls process needs to be assessing your spreadsheet integrity, understanding its interconnectedness and how it relates to other files in your environment to ensure that your files are fulfilling the business purpose that they were created for. You also want to make sure that they're free from errors. So this can be logic errors, data coming in, whether it's an omission error from someone leaving something out, a calculation error, or formula error within a spreadsheet. All these things need to be built together to make sure that your spreadsheet is being effectively controlled. So three other controls that we typically find as valuable, and there can be more, these are kind of the core three in our eyes, are access, version, and change control. So making sure that you understand who is going into your spreadsheets, make sure there are versions so you have a history of the changes that are being made, and that change management control. And really what that gets into is making sure that you have workflow within your spreadsheets and within your processes to make sure that significant changes are reviewed and approved. Now, again, you'll see this word evidence pop up, and it's making sure that you're evidencing that controls are consistently applied. So really this audit and management reporting needs to be applied throughout all three of these policy elements to make sure that you can show your management, as well as your auditors, both internal and external, that all three of these things are being done. So we've talked a bit about a policy and the main components of it. It's important to remember that your policy is going to shift as new regulations come and go. So we have both internal and external pressure. So you have lawmakers, new regulations coming out. You have internal audit, who's very much worried about the risk that this brings to the business. And you also have increasingly complex SOX environments. So down here on the bottom left, what Apparity really does, and it's kind of we've grown in this space. I mentioned that spreadsheets truly are kind of our bread and butter, but spreadsheets really aren't built in a silo. And so there's this world, what we call end user computing, that's made up of spreadsheets as well as databases and other applications. And while spreadsheets kind of make up the lion's share of all these applications, spreadsheets are connected to other data sources. They manipulate data and output to other data sources, and all these things are working with one another. So your policy needs to be able to reflect that, and you need to be nimble enough to be able to kind of manage all these different inputs, as well as the different environments that your spreadsheets are going to be in. Now, a spreadsheet, as we've kind of talked about or hinted at as we've gone through this, as I've talked through some of these slides, really isn't too much unless you can enable it. And really the only effective way to do that is through technology enablement. So a technology, if you start thinking about our core components again of identification, will be able to help you go out and wade through those thousands of different spreadsheets that might be in your environment, because that's a very, very challenging thing to do manually. As you're trying to apply controls, being able to look through your spreadsheets and see everything that changed is going to be very challenging without any sort of technology enablement. So we really do view this piece as core and going part and parcel with an established policy. And these two things together are really what's going to make up an overall risk management framework for your spreadsheets. Now, as we kind of move into talking a little bit more about Apparity, this is really where we are focused as a company, is being this enablement piece. So we've talked a good bit today now about the policy and the different things you need to have set up. So again, that identification, that inventory, and that controls. And now we're going to talk a little bit more. So as we look at the Apparity solution itself, what Apparity is designed to do, and how we built our modules, is to map to those same three core capabilities that each policy needs to have. So I mentioned them as identify, inventory, and control earlier. Our modules are discover, register, and manage, and those map one-to-one with the core components. So as a solution, what Apparity is designed to do is a number of things, and I have some of those listed here. So the first one being, we want to be able to enable that spreadsheet governance policy and procedures. So it's really what you see up top there. You have a policy, you want to be able to enable it within your environment. So how do you do that? And that's going to be through a technology that can easily apply all the controls that you need and help you facilitate all three of those core areas. Now, this same technology needs to work well with your users. So users can't be forced to go through rigorous processes, especially as they're going through closed periods and helping build the final financial reporting. They need to be able to easily take responsibility, but also maintain compliance without a solution that kind of gets in their way. Now, we've also tried to build the Apparity solution to be scalable across the enterprise. Many times when we come into a new environment, what we'll see is that companies will start off in their financial reporting, and start off with a small user group, and they'll kind of scale out from there across different user groups. So maybe the heaviest users of spreadsheets, and then they move out. We see this a lot with our financial services firms who maybe want to start using this for SOX spreadsheets, but as they move out into other parts of the environment, they see spreadsheets are being used not just for financial reporting, but for other critical processes. So not something we'll talk much about today, but a good thing to keep in mind as you start thinking about how spreadsheets can really do all those different use cases that we talked about. Making sure that your policy can interact with those is also critical. So finally, we also realize that every company is different. So Apparity is configurable to reflect and the unique requirements that each company has. So while all companies need to comply with one regulation that SOX, how each company does that is going to be different. How each company is organized and set up is going to be different. So making sure that our solution and making sure that your policy and our solution can work together to be able to accomplish that. So I know that we've kind of walked through a lot of this so far and haven't opened it up for questions just yet. So I would like to see if anyone has any questions, and just ask that if anyone does have anything to please add it to the chat window. So please feel free to reach out, and I'll try to get to those, whether it be in the next portion or as they come through. And obviously we'll leave time at the end to go through these. So the final thing that I want to do is now jump into a solution demonstration. So we've talked about the identification, the inventory, and the control. We've talked a little bit about now how Parity can help facilitate that. So the deck that we built will be sent out to everyone. So just to note that I know some of these slides may be content heavy. So we wanted to make sure that we had something that was meaty enough to leave behind to you. We'll also be sending out our sample policy and procedures document to everyone after the end of this, so you can see kind of what an example policy procedures that we've built that's been effective before looks like. And so right now what we're going to do is jump into the solution itself and kind of cover off each of these three areas. So from the discovery to the registration to the management of your critical spreadsheets. All right. So what you'll see now is I'm bringing up the Apparity inventory solution, the Apparity web console. So as we now start looking through our solution, we're going to try to map this back to the key lifecycle events. So as we start with the identification of our files, we start with what's called the Apparity Discovery module. What the Apparity Discovery module allows you to do is scan all your network drives for potential spreadsheets and for high-risk spreadsheets that may be involved in your critical reporting processes. So as you look here, I'm going to click on this unregistered section. And you'll see that I've already initiated a scan against this. We'll see now that we have files that are built into groups and rated as high, medium, or low for their complexity. So what we've done so far is we've now scanned our network environment. We've brought back these files and we started grouping them together. So what Discovery is designed to do, and I'll kind of work through this top to bottom and then moving left to right. What Discovery is designed to do is to be able to help you and point out the areas where your financial reporting or critical spreadsheets might lie. And the first way we do this is by collecting and aggregating a really robust set of information against each of your spreadsheets. So you'll see here, now what we've done is after we've scanned this environment, all files are going to be listed on this main page here, and they're going to be grouped. Now what grouping lets you do is be able to analyze each of your spreadsheets kind of as your users would view them. So instead of saying that each spreadsheet you find is its own individual spreadsheet, what we really know is that when a user, for example here, is going to use their balance sheet input file, they're going to call it their balance sheet input file. They're not going to worry about if they create a V2, a V3, or V4, that those are all independent. Really, it's one file, there's multiple versions of it. So the first thing that we're going to do is try to group those together for you. What we're then going to do is assign the structural complexity rating as high, medium, or low. And what this is doing is looking within each of your files. It's taking all the information that we're gathering against it, and it's utilizing a configurable structural complexity rating to be able to say, based on your policy, does this look like a high-risk file that is pretty complex that we want to look into to see if it's something that we need to include that fall under our spreadsheet management policy. The type of information we're gathering to be able to build this structural complexity profile is going to be over here to the right. So we're going to see things like file size, whether it contains links, whether there's certain PII, so whether there's email, social security numbers, or credit cards, whether that file contains macros or links to other files. We're also going to get into some of the complexity of the formula. So the average formula length. the total number of formulas that have cells in them. Or sorry, the total number of cells that have formulas within them. And then some other things like whether the sheets are protected, total number of columns and rows that are active. Now, all these are built up, and together what you can do is form a really good picture of your total of all your files, and form a really strong picture of the typical risk rating of a file. So I mentioned before that we're grouping files by file name. One of the other things we're doing as we're scanning your files is look into each of the worksheets and see if we can consolidate those files by a similar worksheet structure. So if we see things that have some similar worksheet names or sheet names within the file, we'll be able to group those files together as well and put them in this view for you. So what we typically find, or what we look at with customers, is to start out by helping them understand, based on your policy, based on risk that this brings to your spreadsheets, brings to the organization, what are some of the typical things you use spreadsheets for, and how can we help you define this complexity rating? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at one of my high-risk files, and if we click into here, you'll see that I have all this information right at my fingertips. And we can look at this by not just the aggregated workbook data, but by each of the worksheets themselves as well. Now, we mentioned before that understanding the interconnectedness of your files is critical. And so with Apparity, one of the interesting things we can do is build a map of all the different connections that your file has to other spreadsheets and different applications within the environment. So as we look here, we see this is a fairly simple map, but we can see that our balance sheet 2018 has connections to 4 other files within the environment. So as we look at our balance sheet 2018 file, we can see now that it's connected to some input files, some assets and liabilities, as well as some owner information. We're also going to look a little bit downstream, and we can see the connections that these other files have connections to. So our balance sheet owner file has a connection to an employee master file. Now, what this is critical and enabling to do from a SOX process is understand the different files that may be related to one another. So while you have maybe one file that you know is a SOX or a financial reporting related spreadsheet, what you can do is now see things that connect into it, and both those upstream and downstream links. You can find out what files this is outputting to, as well as what files are inputting into this. So when someone comes and asks you, are you sure this is everything? You can now answer yes with confidence based on the discovery as well as this Model Map Explorer functionality. So as we walk through this, now that we've been able to identify some spreadsheets within our environment that are critical, that we do believe fall under our SOX management or SOX spreadsheet management policy, what we now want to do is kind of move into the inventory piece. And so if we remember and we circle back, being able to build an inventory means having a full listing of all the different spreadsheets that are involved in this process, as well as associating that key data against them. So what I'm going to do here is click into my balance sheet 2018 file. I'm going to click on registration details. And this is the register piece of the functionality, where you can now register a file into your inventory and be able to define all those key data elements against them. So what you'll see here is just a sample set of information that we can provide and we can build against each file, and as well as how it can be organized. As we work with clients, and as we said, every company is different. So the types of data that you're going to be able to define against each of these spreadsheets is going to be highly configurable. So this company may want to be able to define the title of their spreadsheet, as well as a description, a purpose, what category it falls in, so if it falls in the accounting finance category, for example. We also want to help build out that risk rating for you. So being able to define whether something is essential to business operations, whether there's a workaround available. One thing that we work with customers to do is also have these highly configurable so that an answer of yes, no, yes would spit out a risk rating, an overall risk rating of critical, for example, or significant. We can also bring in your policy and pull that policy directly into your view here so that users can easily reference the policy as they're being able to help define that criticality rating for each file. We mentioned before that user roles are very important, so being able to find what part of the business this sits in, some of those business processes that this spreadsheet feeds, as well as some of the different user roles. So you'll see here we can integrate with your Active Directory. I can identify my name as the owner and tag myself there. So as we go through this, the one important thing to remember is that this is highly configurable to your environment. You are able to define the different groups of files. And when you finally have finished this, I'm going to go ahead and jump into a registration that I've already completed. We go into our SOX Spreadsheet 101 file here, and we can now see that all these data elements have been tagged against this file. So we know that this is a critical file, and we have a lot of the key metadata that your regulators are going to look for and ask for each of your key spreadsheets. We're also now going to know the different owners, the approvers of them within your organization, which is another critical aspect to ensuring that you're fully compliant with SOX processes. So now as we've started building out our inventory of files, what we want to do next is be able to apply those controls. So if we look at this spreadsheet on the bottom here, we'll see that it's labeled as a critical file, and the risk rating here is tagged as critical. So that means it's going to need to have a really effective and robust controls framework against it. And for spreadsheets, as I mentioned earlier, what this oftentimes means is being able to apply those access, version, and change controls for each file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and I'm going to open up a sample file that I have. I'm going to pull it over. I'm going to talk for just a second about how the Apparity solution is architected. So Apparity utilizes a server-client architecture. What that means really for you and your end users is that there's two interaction points that you're going to have with Apparity. What we've just done is we've talked through the look for them, look at their risk rating or their complexity ratings and things like that. You're also going to then build your inventory. And so that serves as a central point so that all users can go in and that your compliance users can really now use that one central point of truth and single pane of glass into your entire view to be able to evidence to your regulators that you have a strong handle on this. Now, because all of these critical applications are spreadsheets, that means that you also need to have a component that sits within the files themselves. And that's going to be our Apparity add-in that you see up top here. So that's the second component of Apparity that is critical to maintaining. And that's really where our controls application module is going to come into play. It's going to be through the add-in itself. So at this stage in the process, we've kind of gone through our discovery process. We've scanned our network drives. We've gone through our share drives. We've looked for spreadsheets. We've identified some and pulled back some critical information against them. We found ones that look to be high risk, and we've now registered them into our inventory. We found out that they're critical, so their risk rating is critical, and that means that we want to apply those access, version, and change controls against them. So this is the final step against this. This is really moving us into that green stage of compliance that we're going to be fully clear and actively managing the risk that this spreadsheet provides. So what I'm going to start off by doing is now onboarding this file. We call onboarding this file into Apparity. And what this means is associating that entry within our inventory with the file itself. So we've already gone ahead and we've already registered that file into the inventory. So we're going to say, is this already registered? Yes. And we're going to look and we're going to see our SOX Spreadsheet 101. And you'll see the word UDA listed here. That's called a user developed application. Just as a note, it's kind of the same thing as a spreadsheet. It's just a different terminology for it. It can also apply, it's just terminology that can apply to spreadsheets and access databases and queries and scripts and things like that. For our purposes today, we're really focused on those spreadsheets because those typically make up about 90 to 95% of the critical applications that we see for our end users and financial reporting processes. So a quick sidebar on that. But as we look through here, we go through our registration that we've already done. We see that each of these categories has a check mark up next to it until we get to the teams and roles. You're going to see that now we have our approver field has not yet been filled in. And I'm going to go ahead and use our Active Directory lookup to search for Gavin Spencer. So I'm going to bring Gavin in as the approver for this file. Again, as we look through each of these are highly configurable to your environment. And so I've chosen a very complex example today of all the different fields that you can use. Some customers choose to have 5 or 6 different fields they want to fill out. Others get up to here, we see 30 or 40 different fields that we want to fill out. Really, again, what this form is designed to do is map to your policy for the critical information that we want to collect against each of our spreadsheets. So I'm going to hit next and go ahead and click start onboarding. And what's going to happen here is this is now really the onboarding process is kicking in, and we're now associating that file with that registration entry that we saw on the web console. And we're now applying those controls to the file itself. So the first way you'll know that those controls are being applied is you'll see that version control functionality right here on the right side of the screen. First thing to note is that this is something that we can minimize. So I'm going to onboarding complete. Okay, we can hit minimize this on the side of the screen. You'll see that as we start going through the demo, this version history pane will be brought out and built out a little bit more. So as we look at each of our functionalities, the first thing we want to do is highlight this version control functionality. And one of the unique things about Apparity is something called fingerprinting. So as you're looking to make sure that your files are version controlled, what you really want to do is make sure you don't lose track of them. So what Apparity does to get around this is to be able to, as I click V2 here, apply something called a fingerprint to the file. So every time we create a new version, regardless of what we call it, so here we just called it V2, you could call it anything you wanted, or you could save it anywhere you wanted to. Apparity, no matter what, is going to be able to track that file because it is already under the Apparity management framework. We have a fingerprint applied to it, which means we're able to see that wherever it goes in your environment. So that's also what that fingerprint's going to help us facilitate, is the change management controls against it. So you see, as we built out our version 2 here, that's automatically tracked within our version history pane. So we're able to see this version history for the file being built. So I'm going to go through some updates. I'm going to try to make a variety of updates, not necessarily things that would be used exactly in a financial reporting process, but some different ones that'll be able to highlight the different things that we can capture. We have a formula here. I'm just going to hard code some data in, a big no-no in the process. We are adding 2 numbers together here. So this is mapping back to that type of change that we saw that caused the huge issue that we looked at in some of our slides earlier on today. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 changes so far. I'm going to add a formula in here. It's going to do a simple sum. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and delete a formula. Also going to make a structural change on this part of the file. So again, these are all the standard types of changes that your users are going to make while updating their financial reporting spreadsheets. I'm going to go ahead and save this file. I'm going to close it. And I'm going to enter in some comments against it. All right. So what Apparity is now doing is that change management controls are kicking in. We're looking at some of the changes made to the file, and we're processing those changes so that as you look at each different version, what you can do now is see the changes that were made between each. So I'm going to open up that second version. What I'm now going to highlight is these change management controls kind of live and in action. So we see that we updated our file with new data. That new modification is brought here. We can see that was performed by me just a couple minutes ago at 2:45 p.m. And really, at this stage, we have our full version history, and now we want to generate a comparison between these files. I'm going to right-click, hit Compare Selected Versions. And what this enables you to do is, as you're going through your processes and as you're working with your users to define a strong process for being able to ensure that changes are reviewed and approved, it's going to keep them from having to go through lengthy documentation processes. So when they come into many clients, what they'll first say is, I have a spreadsheet in the very beginning that's my change control spreadsheet, and I have to document and type out every single thing I've done. And the person has to take that copy and look through it line by line to see what's been changed. This facilitates that entire process for you and puts all of those changes into a single, simple, really easy to use console that we call the change log. So what you'll see at the top here, all the different types of changes that we collect. I'm going to jump straight over to the cell level changes. And this is a tabular view that shows you all the different change types. You'll see most of the critical changes that Apparity is going to capture are formula changes. So as users take data down, as they process that data, it's typically and almost always really done through a formula. So things like formula additions and deletes and changes and going back and forth between data and formula. And if you remember, I was counting out the different changes, and it seems that we have 7 changes here, which maps back to the changes that we made on the file. Note that for now, we're turning off things like data changes and calculated value changes. Typically, we want to make sure that this works for users. And what they're really doing is just bringing in bulk data from a system. So while this is a functionality that you can turn on and off, we typically leave it off because the most critical changes that users want to see are related to their formulas. So I'm going to jump into a side-by-side view. That's, I think, a really powerful way for users to be able to see their changes. I'm going to pull this over from my other screen here. And you'll see that all these changes are now presented to the user in a really simple, easy to use platform. So now we can click into each file and see that this used to be a formula, now it's deleted, that there was a plus, now there's a minus here, that this used to be blank and we added a formula. You're also going to see here, as we move to the next one, that we're going to have this row addition is going to appear in yellow here. And the reason I want to bring this one up and I want to highlight it is to talk a little bit about something called a filter noise capability. If you remember me kind of counting the different changes that we made within the file, you'll notice that I made 7 changes. When we click filter noise off here, you'll notice there were actually 281 changes to the file that were made between those 2 versions. What happens is when you add a row that's going to push down all your different formulas, it's going to really kind of change this from a 16 summing up row 16 to summing up row 17. Those are not changes the user made, but because the way Excel works, that is a change. What Apparity is going to do is it's going to filter that out automatically for you. Again, what we want to do is make sure that we're working within how the user is typically working. They made 7 changes. We're going to show them 7 changes in their file. So all these things are really critical to making sure that this policy that you're going to be implementing and you're hoping to enable well through a technology is actually implemented well, and that your end users are happy with how things work and that they're happy with how things are being presented to them, and they're going to be able to have a simple and easy way of complying with the policy versus having to do a lot of long manual steps or having a technology that you implement that really doesn't work for them. It just creates more work for them. So in that same vein, what we're also going to be able to do is now if a user has these changes, they find that they're comfortable with the way these look, they want to be able to send that to someone else for review. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and submit this file for review. And the final thing that I want to show you today is how Parity can help facilitate and do some of those review and approval workflow and sign-offs. So we see here that, as you remember back when we were kind of assigning the data against this file, Gavin was tagged as the approver. A quick note that this can be anyone in your environment. We're going to leave it as Gavin for now. We're going to go ahead and submit this to Gavin for review. So now when Gavin gets it, he's going to see the exact same change log that I just saw. He'll be able to review those changes and say yes or no and sign off on them. As I refresh my version history screen here, you'll see this is automatically updated, that my changes were submitted for review. If I go to my reviews icon here, you'll see that I can see the different changes that I've reviewed and approved. So previously, Gavin has already approved this change log. So you can see that now once these are sent over to someone else, Gavin can then go in, review those same changes and give me feedback. And that really facilitates that 2-step process that we discussed earlier. So instead of just having a single point of failure within this process and one person for your very critical SOX spreadsheet making changes and reviewing them, you can now bring other people into this process. And that's a key thing that regulators want to see, is they need to have a separation of controls. So it can't be one person doing all this. It has to be multiple people, a multi-tiered review, and that's what's facilitated through this process. So I know this is a good bit of information, and hopefully this really showed you how the Apparity solution can facilitate those discovery, inventory, and control features through each of our modules. I'm not going to go ahead and finish up the review and approval process because I do want to leave time for some discussion at the end. But as we wait for questions to come through via the chat, we also have Gavin Spencer on as well. So I know that we're able to also help answer questions as they come in. So I just want to thank everyone for joining. We have the remaining time left to be able to talk. So wherever you have questions, doesn't have to be about the solution. We're happy to answer any policy questions that you have. Please feel free to add those to the chat. Or I think we may be able to open this up to audio if we can get people being able to ask questions there. So thank you guys again for joining. Really appreciate. And to circle back to our slides here, I'll leave this up on the screen. Hopefully today you've learned a lot about the SOX management process, really what SOX spreadsheets are, and then what types of controls that you and your regulators are looking for. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll leave this open to questions.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Hey, Gavin.
Hey, Chris, thanks for that. So there were a couple of questions that came through. One from Susan Johnson, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually unmute everybody, because what that will do is it will allow you to jump in and obviously ask any of the questions that you want to feel that you like to address. But Susan did ask if we have the capability to upload. And my assumption there is that Susan was talking about the ability to upload an existing inventory into the Apparity system. Absolutely, we've done that many times, and obviously, typically rather, customers have maintained. There's quite an irony here, a spreadsheet inventory of the spreadsheets. And so one of the first things that people do is they want to put that into a formal controlled environment. So yes, that's something that we absolutely do.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the screen that you saw and the configuration that we're showing today is actually from a customer who had a very similar scenario. So they had a spreadsheet inventory. They asked us to upload that for them. So they were effectively creating, as you say, a new high-risk spreadsheet that they needed to manage, and so we were able to bring that into to the inventory module for them.
Okay. Okay. So I did notice that there was one other question, which was, do we offer pilots? I can't see actually. I think the person may have dropped off, but the question did come through earlier on. Do we do pilots? Do we provide the ability for customers to trial the product? We absolutely do, and happy to have those discussions as and when you guys are ready.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, just from my experience, so I do lead all the pilots of the proof of concepts within the U.S. for us, and so just for everyone on the call, one of the things we've seen is being able to do a policy review as part of that pilot with our customers. So being able to give kind of live feedback to clients on their existing spreadsheet policy, just based on our experience. You know, we've done this many times. This is oftentimes our client's first time doing that. So I found that not just trying the solution, but also being able to get that real-time kind of feedback as we work with you and come on site to talk through your policy and how it can best be implemented is another big value driver for our clients that choose to do a pilot.
And we have another question, which I think Chris may have referred to this earlier on, and again from Susan. Can we provide a copy of the slide deck via email? Absolutely. And we'll be sending that out to all the attendees. The other side to this is there are actually 4 handouts that are available and for you to download, and they include an overview of what a good set of spreadsheet guidelines, some examples that we've accumulated over the years, and that's the 2019 version. There is also a very detailed spreadsheet and EUC best practices and procedures. There is a summary of the Apparity solution, and if you feel so inclined, there is a video where we briefly go over the Spreadsheet Management 101, which you can watch at your leisure. So feel free to download those. Those are yours to peruse, and obviously reach out and let us know your thoughts and if we can answer any more questions. So
wonderful. So yeah, is there any other questions that have come through? I think that sounds like it did it.
Okay. So thanks everybody once again, and we look forward to talking to you again with another set of webinars that will be coming out over the next few weeks. And thank you all very much. Bye-bye.